Remember this: not every boundary needs an apology. Sometimes the guilt you feel does not mean you did something wrong. It means you are no longer accepting something you used to tolerate in silence. And that can make uncomfortable the people who benefited from your silence. So before you apologize, ask yourself, did I hurt someone? Or did I simply stop letting them walk over me? Because that question can show you the difference between a sincere apology and a guilt someone learned to use to control you. If you want to keep learning how to detect these dynamics before it is too late, subscribe to Patterns of Power. At the beginning, we said this: you set a boundary and ended up feeling guilty. Now you know why. Because some people do not attack the boundary directly. They attack the feeling that remains after it. They make defending yourself feel cruel. They make saying no feel selfish. They make asking for respect feel exaggerated. They make speaking clearly feel like an offense. And when they achieve that, they no longer need to take your voice away. They only need to make you feel bad every time you use it. The point is not to become cold. And it is not about refusing to apologize when you truly hurt someone. Apologizing is necessary when you cross a line. But you should not have to apologize for having a line. That difference changes everything. You can speak with respect. You can choose your words carefully. You can listen to the other person. But you do not need to turn your boundary into an apology so someone else does not feel uncomfortable. Because if every time you protect yourself you have to apologize, then they are not listening to you. They are training you to step back. So what can you observe? First, does the person listen to your boundary, or do they only react to feeling questioned? Second, after the conversation, does the problem become clearer, or do you end up defending your character? Third, can you say no without everything becoming drama? Fourth, does every difficult conversation end with you apologizing, even when you are only trying to explain something? If the answer repeats itself, you are not just seeing sensitivity, you are seeing a pattern. And patterns matter more than one reaction. A boundary will not always feel comfortable for others, and that does not mean it is wrong. Sometimes a boundary feels uncomfortable because it breaks a habit. Before, they could joke about you, and now they cannot. Before, they could demand things from you, and now they cannot. Before, they could cross a line, and now you named it. Before, they could make you feel responsible, and now you started seeing it more clearly. That is why some people react so strongly. Not because your boundary is cruel, but because your boundary removes access to a version of you that was easier to move. The hardest part about this dynamic is that it can look very emotional. The other person may cry, they may go silent, they may say it hurt them, they may act as if your boundary destroyed them. And of course, you do not want to hurt anyone. So you lower your voice, you soften the message, you step back a little, you apologize to calm the atmosphere. But here is the important difference.
Being careful with how you say something is healthy. Canceling your boundaries so the other person does not feel uncomfortable is something else.
There is another important sign. After talking to that person, you do not feel clearer. You feel more confused. You arrived with a specific discomfort, but you leave wondering if you were unfair. You arrived with a legitimate need, but you leave feeling selfish. You arrived wanting to create order, but you leave trying to repair something you did not break. That confusion is not small, because when every boundary ends up becoming guilt, your confidence wears down, and little by little, you start asking for permission to defend yourself.
And when that happens, you are no longer speaking from your boundary. You are speaking from their wound. You start saying, "No, that's not what I meant. You're not a bad person. I'm not attacking you. I don't want you to feel that way." And without noticing, you have already stepped back. The conversation no longer revolves around what you needed. It revolves around calming the person who felt questioned. That is the silent turn. The boundary is paused. Guilt takes control, and you end up apologizing for trying to protect yourself.
Something else happens very often. The other person turns your boundary into a personal offense. You say, "I need you not to speak to me like that." And they answer, "So now I'm a bad person?" You say, "I don't want you to joke about that." And they answer, "So now I can't say anything around you?" You say, "I need space." And they answer, "Of course, as always, I'm the problem." That move may look like pain, but many times it is control. Because it forces you to abandon your point to rescue their image.
One clear sign of this dynamic is that you always end up justifying yourself. You do not simply say, "I did not like that." You have to explain 10 times why it hurt. You have to soften every word. You have to repeat that you were not trying to attack. You have to take care of their reaction more than your own boundary. And the most exhausting part is that even when you explain everything well, it never seems enough. There is always a part of you being judged. Your intention, your tone, your sensitivity, your way of reacting. And then the original problem disappears.
Listen is exactly what manipulation means. Because when someone makes us associate boundaries with guilt, they no longer need to control us all the time. We begin to control ourselves. That is when the boundary starts to break. Not because the other person is right, but because you start feeling that defending yourself costs too much. Every time you speak, there is drama. Every time you name something, there is reproach. Every time you say no, there is distance. Every time you ask for respect, you end up feeling guilty. And over time, your mind learns something dangerous. It is easier to tolerate it than to set a boundary.
A healthy person can feel uncomfortable with your boundary. That is normal. Not everyone receives a difficult conversation well, but a healthy person
even if they feel uncomfortable, tries to understand. They listen. They ask. They reflect. They may disagree, but they do not try to make you feel cruel for speaking. The dynamic changes when the other person uses their discomfort as punishment. They become cold. They create distance. They make themselves the victim. They make you feel like you damaged something. And then you start thinking, maybe I exaggerated. Maybe I was unfair. Maybe I should not have said anything.
Because when someone manages to move the conversation from your boundary to your guilt, they gain ground. You wanted to say, "This hurt me," but you end up saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel bad." You wanted to say, "I don't want this to happen again," but you end up explaining, "Maybe I said it the wrong way." You wanted to protect yourself, but you end up protecting the emotions of the person who crossed your boundary. And that does not happen by accident. It happens because guilt can become a very silent form of control. That is what makes some dynamics so dangerous. They do not always force you to step back by yelling. Sometimes they make you step back through guilt. You name something you no longer want to allow, and the other person acts as if your boundary was an attack. Then the conversation changes. It is no longer about their behavior. It is no longer about what happened. It is no longer about how you felt. Now it is about the way you said it, your tone, your reaction, whether you were too harsh. And that is where the trap begins. You said something bothered you. You tried to explain it calmly. You did not yell. You did not attack. You were not looking for a fight. You only set a boundary. But then something happened. The other person changed their tone. They became cold. They acted offended. They looked at you as if you had done something wrong. And within minutes, what started as self-protection turned into guilt. You were no longer talking about what hurt you. You were trying to prove that you were not a bad person.